But Dark Magician has pretty much always been bad. As far as its competitive impact goes, it's basically had none. Unless that deck just won a YCS, I don't want to hear about how it's the best out there, because it's a lie. There has never, in the history of the game, been a competitively successful Dark Magician deck. I don't particularly like Dark Magician. I'm sure you can tell that. It's always been an underwhelming card no matter how much Konami throws at it. Dark Magician sucks. He is by far the least viable in competitive play. I mean, oh man, is the Neospatian archetype and Neos and all the support surrounding it just so darn bad. And the fact of the matter is that Neos isn't even good enough to be classified as a rogue strategy or tier 2 or tier 3 or tier 4. It's pretty much only reserved for casual play, and even in that casual play, it's pretty much the bottom of the barrel. The actual competitive impact of Exodia is basically zero, and that means that this card is a competitive flop. But Doug, I play this deck casually, it beats my friends on the lunchroom table all the time. That's great, that's not what we're focusing on though. You really don't want to draw those Exodia pieces in your opening hand, which creates sort of this paradox of you need to draw the Exodia pieces eventually, but not early on enough so that you can actually get your engine going. The deck is so inherently inconsistent, and there simply aren't enough draw spells to play in an Exodia deck. It's just a lot better for competitive players to just play decks that don't have to draw 5 specific cards and can just draw like 2 or 3 random cards in their deck that are just inherently better than the Exodia pieces overall over like a long tournament where they can actually just win more games than they would have playing Exodia. The Blue Eyes White Dragon as an individual card isn't actually that great. It just has 3000 attack, which is why it didn't actually end up on this list. Unfortunately for fans of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, this is not an anime review channel. And then you look at the card and yeah, 4500 is a lot, but hey, wait a second, I just lost 9000 potential attack points and I only got 4500 out of it. It's worth asking the question, well, why are you doing that? Why do I have to lose 4 cards just to summon 1 monster? But wait a second, that 1 monster that you summon only has 1500 more attack than the monsters that you traded for it, and you just lost a whole bunch of cards. Isn't that kind of a ripoff? And the answer is yes. This is Neo Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, which came out in the movie pack, and yeah, I completely forgot about this card. This card has the exact same stats and summoning requirement of Ultimate Dragon. This card technically is a strict upgrade in most cases. However, don't let that deceive you, because this card isn't that competitive. This one definitely has some issues that a lot of people might not realize if you're not into the competitive mindset. This card isn't that strong. A lot of the times your opponent will have a way to stop its effect, and yes, I am aware that you can use this card to send other copies of itself from the extra deck to the graveyard to get that graveyard protection effect, but that's not enough, because a lot of the times when this card hits the board, your opponent will immediately have an answer, and that's assuming you can even get it on the board at all. In fact, I actually think this card might be worse than Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon. I usually bring up Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon when I want to look at a card that looks good on paper to a lot of casual players, but isn't good in the competitive scene. And I think another set of monsters that is probably an even better example of this is the Egyptian gods. And they're not competitively viable. They basically never have been. Obviously, 3 tributes is not good. 3 monsters being tributed means that anytime you summon a god card, you are taking a straight -3 in card advantage. You've now lost 3 cards without your opponent even doing anything. So at this point, if your opponent gets rid of the obelisk, which they very easily can, not only with newer cards like kaijus, but also older cards like Dark Hole and Mirror Force, if they get rid of the obelisk, you're now looking at a 1-card hand to your opponent's 5-card hand. And if you take a look at that first turn 5-card opening that I talked about with the obelisk, you can see why Cypher starts to look pretty rough. The truly worst one is the Winged Dragon of Ra. So this card is almost always just going to lose you the game. It's extremely risky. Not to mention that when you use that effect, you're just leaving yourself open to, as long as your opponent can somehow do 100 damage to you, even if they have a copy of Sparks, they can kill you, and that's really rough. Problem is that the decks, or the people that are going to be playing Ring Dragon of Ra, are going to be playing the jankiest decks possible, so it's never going to happen. It's just absolutely crazy. Yeah, Wing Dragon of Ra is just utterly terrible. I just can't believe this card is so bad. It's just really dumb card design. So at the end of the day, all these cards sort of have a really bad return on investment. You're losing 3 cards to summon these, and they don't do anything when they hit the board. There's almost never a time when you would want to trade 3 on-field cards to waste your normal summon, really, on a god card instead of like a link summon, or instead of a seed summon or a synchro summon. Anyway, that's gonna wrap up my discussion. I think that the god cards at the end of the day just aren't worth their investment. I think the real downside of like having so many cards in your card game is that there's all these cards in the middle that are just painfully mediocre. And the Wicked Gods, which is what we're going to be talking about in today's video, fall into this category. However, we'll immediately see that their summoning conditions are so awful. So all 3 of them cannot be special summoned in any way. They also can't be normal summoned or set except by attributing 3 monsters. So it's not looking so hot. So let's see what their effects are. It says have the attack and defense of all monsters on the field except this card, and that is really disappointing. And the Wicked Dreadrue is just painfully mediocre like the rest of these cards, but I think more so than the other 2. This card is just so boring. I mean, it doesn't really do anything flashy. I mean, honestly, this card is worse than Obelisk the Tormentor in basically every single way, which is something that I didn't think I would say about any card. The Wicked Eraser suffers because your opponent can just not set anything or not play anything, and then it has 0 attack points, and you might think that that's worth it. You might think, well, that makes this card good because your opponent can't or won't play anything, and now you just have a big guy. That's not really what happens, though. What happens is your opponent just summons like 1 guy and attacks over this thing, so only has 1,000 attack. That's pretty disappointing. This card is just awkwardly positioned. It only really works if your opponent has a lot of cards, but if your opponent has a lot of cards, it's very likely that one of them can actually just deal with this thing, because the amount of cards your opponent has to have that would do nothing would just have to be ridiculous for this card to have a lot of attack points and also stick on the board. First off, what is this artwork? The Wicked Avatar is literally just a bowling ball. That is so strange for a card that is supposed to be the embodiment of evil. Boy, does it look silly. I mean, it looks like they didn't finish the artwork. What a ridiculous looking card. There's almost no scenario where you will be able to summon 3 monsters, tribute them to normal summon this thing, and then also have a high attack monster on the field so that this thing doesn't just have 0 attack points or like 1,500 or something. And if all those pieces align, well, you probably could have just made like a synchro summon or a seed summon or a link summon. Any other type of summon probably would have been better than the Wicked Avatar, and it really does suck. Boy, these cards are just underwhelming. I mean, I started out the video talking about how they're so painfully mediocre, but I really feel that that's their card's problem. These cards aren't that interesting. They're not terrible, but they're certainly not good, which